Welcome to our new season of the Success Series webinars brought to you by State Civil Service. We are so excited to be here with you today and doing something totally new, a new platform, as you might have noticed, and a new way of doing things. We have today the beginning of a three-part series on conflict, where before we always just did one show on one topic. This way we go deeper into a topic, and we're real excited about being able to do that. So today, it's about accountability in conflict. We're going to give you some insights and some really good ideas about ways to take the sting out of conflict and instead turn this into learning experiences.
We're also going to talk about, Christy, about how everyone can take a positive role in managing conflict, whether it's in the workplace or in your personal life, because it happens everywhere.
Yep. And our topics for today, good ones. When to get involved in conflict, and perhaps more importantly, when not to get involved in conflict. Big one. We're going to talk about the other roles that you might have in conflict. Even if it's not you directly who's involved in a conflict, you might have an opportunity to help keep a positive environment in your department by the role that you could play. So that's something we're going to talk about. And then we're going to talk about individual accountability, responsibility, and what responsibilities we have in conflict situations. So those are our main topics that we'll be talking about today.
You know, when I think about conflict, Christy, it makes my stomach turn, because I'm the type of person who if I could avoid conflict at all costs, I would definitely avoid it. But sometimes that's not the right thing. But I think that one of the biggest decisions about conflicts is deciphering whether you should get involved or you shouldn't get involved. So, Monica, I believe you have some tips for us on that.
Yes, I do, Kim. So the first thing you got to do is choose your battles wisely. So we're going to look at a few questions that you want to ask yourself before going into that conflict. So is this my issue? I mean, I can admit that I am that person. I'm kind of really protective of people. So I tend to want to jump in on someone's behalf, and it's really not my battle to fight. So you have to be careful with that when you're that kind of like mother hen and you want to take care of everybody, that person needs to be able to resolve their own conflict. Because what happens if you're not there? Then what do?
Yeah.
So that's a fine line you want to pay attention to. The next question is, if I get the outcome I want, will it make a difference? Have you guys ever heard of you win the battle, but you lose the war?
Yes.
So you want to look at that bigger picture. Was really taking it there worth it in that particular instance? What's going to be more important? Then you want to consider, if you do choose to, what are the possible consequences of that action? Unfortunately, I've been in a position where I have chose to act and it did have a negative impact. 4, how will you feel if you avoid the conflict? Do you feel regret? Or are you going to bottle that anger up inside you and then it's going to affect you negatively? Say that incident went on and then someone else were hurt in a more severe manner than you wish you would have spoken. And lastly, if it's affecting your workplace. We definitely don't want to be in a position where it's creating an uncomfortable or a hostile work environment, or if it's actually hindering productivity. And lastly, if it's something that's violating policy, then you really don't have that option not to act. So those are several points that you want to consider when you're deciding whether to act or not to act. So carefully assess that situation, weigh out your pros and cons, because you do have a choice. Every conflict does not need to be engaged, but some you really kind of have to engage. Like Kim said, you can't avoid it, or you don't want to end up becoming passive aggressive because you didn't properly address the conflict.
And something, Kim, that Monica, that we didn't mention, but I think it's key to remember in the workplace is, what's your authority level? If you're going to get involved in something, what level of authority do you have? with the situation. So I think that's something we have to keep in mind in that workplace environment.
It
I
definitely.
think all of these are some really good questions, especially that first one, is this my issue? Because I think I'm kind of like you every now and then, Monica. I want to go off and fight battles for everyone. I fight more for others than I do for myself.
Exactly.
And something else that you mentioned, Monica, is that, when conflict occurs, even if it's between two individuals and it's not, you're not even involved, it can affect the entire team.
Exactly.
And so it's important for us to understand that, even if we're not a part of the conflict, there's some great roles, some positive roles that we can take to impact the situation and move it in the right direction. So I believe, Christy, you're going to talk to us a little bit about those different types of roles, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's what I've been living for. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Melissa. I do like the thing about considering whether it's in your circle of control or if it's just your circle of concern. There's lots of things we're concerned about, but we don't have control over. Letting go of some of that is really important, especially if you're on social media. So some of the roles that we play in conflict, just being the listener. You know how it is that those times that you just need to vent and you don't want them to solve the problem, you just need to get it out of your system. Sometimes we need that. We need somebody who's willing to listen and not judge, just sit back and take it all in and then keep it confidential, because we sure don't want it going back anywhere else. So that listener role is a really important role that absolutely any of us can play in our workplace. Just being a good listener. The neutralizer, now this takes a special personality, because this is the role, and see if any of y'all do this one. It's that person who knows the right language to use to take the sting out of some of the communication. They use the right words. Instead of saying, what did you do? It's more like, what can we do? It's always that teamwork language. So they're using we and us and things like that, so that you feel like, okay, that means that we're not fighting each other. Instead, we're all working together on something. And I think that is a really important role. If you've got people in your department who are really diplomatic and good at being able to do that role, you need to use them in those times, because they are your friends. The analyst. Okay, I think that Julie and Monica would be the analysts in our group, because the analysts are the ones who know how to ask the right questions to get to the root of the problem. So while Kim and I may be sitting here going, oh, this is yes, this is definitely a problem. Oh, they're going, okay, so why is it a problem? What is this? What is, what is the specific that's going on? What's that? They're able to get to the root of the problem, so that even if we solve this conflict, we're not just putting a Band-Aid on something, we're actually solving a deeper issue. The mediator, oh, that's that person who's a good facilitator. And they just need to be that straightforward person who can keep us going. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I looked at I got distracted because there was a squirrel. No, okay. The mediator has to be able to have those discussions that they step back, have these people talk, and make sure that everybody gets their fair chance to talk, and that they're not playing towards either role. They're not favoring anybody. They're making sure that at the end of this conflict, everybody feels like they've been heard. You know how it is. Even when you're talking to customer service people and you're angry, you just want to know somebody heard what you said. And that's a big deal for us. And the innovator, I love it when we have innovators in our department. You know, those creative minds, those people who are always coming up with those off-the-wall solutions to problems, get them involved when you're doing some of this type of brainstorming to solve conflict. Because whereas we might come into a conflict where I have my idea of what will work and I have my idea of what will work, the innovator is that person who thinks beyond those two. It's not one or the other. It's like, hey, what about we take a piece of this one and a piece of this one and come up with a solution that neither one of you thought of? So we need those people who think outside of that immediate zone and are able to come in and bring other ideas. And I love this. I'm seeing Stacy saying she's the listener and the mediator. This is important. You're the analyst, Leanna. That's what you want to be able to do. Recognize what skills you bring to the team and recognize other people in your team who have other skills and call on those so that you can use them to be effective in any time that you're dealing with a conflict.
I love that, Christy, especially when you said, to be able to recognize what those roles and those strengths are in your coworkers, like you did with Monica and Julie, identifying that they're analysts. I definitely could see that. And it's important that if you do step into any of these roles, I want to reiterate what you said in regards to making sure that you're keeping it neutral, that you're keeping it confidential, that you're not escalating the situation. You're trying to lead them in a positive direction.
And, recognizing when you can be a part of those roles and when it's too big for you to be able to be a part of. Because Ronald just put on here about like social media. It's true. People have that anonymity behind a keyboard and they'll throw stuff out there. So he said he decided to remove himself from social media outlets. Sometimes that's the decision to make. If it is causing you a lot of grief, it's not worth it. So being able to say, no, this is not for me. That's a very strong realization.
And Kalisha had a great question. Where does the compromiser fit in? And she said maybe that would be the mediator. And I think, or even the innovator, Kalisha, because I think that compromised person is willing to sacrifice something. And generally, two people that are directly involved in the conflict, it's hard in that moment to want to or be willing to give up anything.
Mm-hmm. Something too that Erica mentioned on here that I think is a really good point. Our level of authority sometimes dictates the role that we can take with a certain party. We can't step up to the role of, the mediator if it's with levels above us who we have no input with. So that is something to keep in mind. Mm-hmm.
Christy, I just wanted to add that don't underestimate that listener. I find myself in that role a lot as well. And I really don't have to say anything. The person really just wants to get whatever is going on off their chest. And you will be surprised how it helps them to take out that emotion before they go back, like we were saying earlier, before you engage that conflict, so you don't react and you can properly respond.
As somebody who's been on the other side of those conversations with you, I can totally agree that you are an excellent listener in those situations. Sometimes we just need to say the words out loud and we hear the answer in just speaking it. It's like, oh, wait, now I realize what that sounds like, and it makes us make the decision. So sometimes that listener role actually helps us find the solution.
Right, or it wasn't really that big of a deal.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Great ones.
I've had that happen to me plenty of times. I call myself Chicken Little. I am always making something huge. The sky is falling. And after I, say it out loud or vent to someone, I realize it's just an acorn. So I get that.
And when all else fails, use Ronald's idea of bubble wrap. Pop it. So that's what I had to say on the roles.
And something else, Christy, Kim, if we can go back a slide just for a second, just to stay on those roles. I think something we have to remember is if we're going to someone outside of the conflict and asking them to be one of these roles, I think we have to be very clear with what our expectations are. Hey, I'm here for you to listen to me. Hey, I'm here for you to give me some advice that I'm probably not thinking about. I'm here for you to talk me through these emotions because I know I'm in a very emotional state right now. So I need to see the logic in this.
Great
I
point,
think
Julie.
setting those expectations helps the person you're going to know what to do. Because,
Right.
We've all played one of these roles when you're in that awkward situation where you're like, I don't know what you want from me right now. So setting those expectations helps for both parties.
That's
Something
excellent.
else I want to add is when you're in these roles as well, especially if you're a person who wants to help everyone, I want you to remember that it's not up to you in those roles to fix the conflict. It's up to those two individuals involved. So it's not up to you to say, hey, Kimberly said this, this, and this, and this is what I think y'all should do. It's about, just playing, whatever that person needs from you, outlining those expectations and realizing that it's not up to you to fix that conflict.
Well, like Monica said, is this my issue?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
We
Excellent.
have enough circuses on our own. I don't think we need to add to it.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, in regards to conflict, there's so many things that you need to consider. I love those set of questions that Monica had asked us, whether it's in our circle of control or circle of concern. And something else that we need to keep in mind is, holding ourselves accountable. What part do we play in this conflict? What is it that we've done to add to this conflict? And I believe that Julie, you have some tips for us, right?
Yeah, I do. You'll go to the next
quiet
slide
for a minute.
me.
Yeah.
Some questions, and this brings me back into the question that you asked earlier. So for the person who asked, how do you ask someone whether or not they're holding themselves accountable? Here's your question right here. Have I asked this person, have they recognized and acknowledged their part in the conflict? That way you're subtly asking them, are they taking accountability? But for those of us who have been in involved in any kind of conflict, you realize no matter your involvement level, you're contributing on some level to the conflict. Mm-hmm. If any of your parents have ever told you it's not what you say, it's how you say it, then it could be your tone that's contributing to the conflict. For some of us, and I'm looking at myself here, it's your facial expressions. My face will always tell you what I'm thinking. Side note, that's why these masks have been wonderful for me. You can only see from here. Okay, so acknowledging that you have some part into it, no matter how big or small that piece is, you have to own whatever it is you're contributing to that. Asking yourself, have I blamed others for something that I could have had fault in? And that's a tough one of those where you're holding up the mirror and looking into it. And a lot of times our immediate reactions is to become defensive, oh, I didn't know this, I didn't know that. And just instead of just saying, you know what, I made a mistake, just taking ownership of that. Have I made excuses instead of accepting responsibility, right? That's another easy one. Oh, I was late today because of traffic or because of X, Y, and Z. Now that's going to be a real issue for some of us when we have to start going back into the workplace. We're going to be like, oh, we forgot how to drive. That's going to be our excuse. And I know I'm making it funny now, but in those conflict situations, what are we making excuses for our behavior? And I think that's something Christy touched on earlier, maybe even before we started, our personality types. I'm a very direct personality, so sometimes I can come off very harshly when I really and truly don't intend it to be that way. So am I making excuses for my harsh behavior or what was perceived by other people as harsh? Or I'm saying, you know what, that was not my intention. And I'm sorry that the words that I chose to use affected the situation. And I will say one that's really tough for me is, have I tried to see it from the other person's perspective? In the moment, that is so, so hard to do. But if we take that step back and look at the situation and say, you know what, I could see how maybe they would be viewing it this way. Now, it may take you some time to get there. It may take you some time, and that's okay. And I think one other question you can ask yourself is there a deeper issue that's at hand here than just the conflict that's happening right now? Because, a lot of us don't like dealing with conflict, so our initial reaction is, well, we'll just sweep this under the rug. And then when we're tired of sweeping things under the rug, we may explode on something silly like office supplies. But that's the last straw. But we're upset about office supplies, so I'm going to have that conversation when really I should be having conversations about incident that happened 2 months ago.
I love that question. As a professional sweeper, that is one that I need to tuck and put in my tool belt. Is this a deeper issue than the conflict at hand? I need to ask myself those questions.
Yeah, we bring
Yeah.
that big old gunny sack with us into the argument, and it's like throw it on the table and here's everything.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then it's like, here's everything. Oh, and you're an awful person on top of it.
Yes,
you know?
there you go.
Yes.
And I think in the chat, we're talking about the 5 whys. That's definitely a very handy tool to help you get to that root cause. You know, is this really what the issue is going on? And I'm going back to the chat to check and see.
I know, I can't resist. I'm sorry, y'all. I keep going over here going, oh, this is
Well, while
good
you're doing
stuff.
that, Julie, it just makes me think about something that someone told me when I was very young. We're so quick to point the finger at someone, like it's always you. But if you just look at this, it's 1 pointing out and 3 pointing this way to make you just think about that self-reflection. What role are you really having in this? And you're putting so much weight on what that person is doing when you're not really acknowledging or addressing, kind of like how you've been saying, your role in the whole conflict.
Well, just drop
That's
the
a
mic,
good one, Monica.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What I love about these accountability questions is you have to do a lot of self-reflection, and these are not going to work if you're not honest.
Yeah.
You have to be honest with yourself. Because I'm
Definitely.
looking at here, and if I recognize and acknowledge my part in the conflict, and if I'm not honest with myself, and be like, I didn't do anything.
Right.
They did. something.
You're
Right.
the problem.
You're the
And
problem.
and
So
there it stays because it's not going any further. You know,
it's not going any further. So you're
Mhm.
going to have to do some, deep self-reflection and be honest with yourself. Because remember, conflict is going to happen, and conflict is not always bad, but your goal is a positive result. And so it's all about being accountable for your actions and the part that you played.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I don't know that we've hit on quite enough yet today, is that conflict doesn't have to be negative. Like if
Right.
we can move past the emotions and get to the facts at hand, we can generally work towards a common goal and have some kind of resolve at the end. And I think a lot of times we may miss some opportunities of getting to know someone better, understanding different perspectives, just because we're so quick to shut down and say, I want to be right.
Can I take a moment to throw something in the chat in
Yeah.
here? Because this kind of goes along with that about wanting to be right. I love what Linda has put on here. It says, there's a tenet I like to remember to de-escalate myself. You are required to give another person the kindest explanation for their behavior that you can. For example, if somebody cuts you off in traffic, you have to think they have a personal emergency.
Right.
I think that is, if everybody thought from that mindset, think how much kinder our first responses would be instead of automatically going to the angry side.
Yeah, and it goes right along with what Terry said. He works with the public, and he's an inspector in some form. And he was taught a long time ago that if you treat others the way you want to be treated by someone in your shoes, you can avoid a lot of those conflicts.
Love that.
So,
It's
yeah.
the golden rule for a reason. I mean,
Yeah.
simply treat people how you want to be treated.
It's
How you wanna
not
be
just something
spoken
to
to.
put on it's not something just to embroider on a pillow. It is really something we ought to keep in mind. Mhm.
Right.
Wow, some good stuff.
Definitely some good stuff. I love these questions, and it's all about practice. I mean, once you guys end this webinar today, are you going to be conflict gurus? No, it's all about practicing. And what I love, and I didn't give Julie kudos, but she's a good listener as well. And she's really good, if I'm venting to her, she's really good at making me understand someone else's perspective. She's really good at asking me that question. And I even I have to think about these accountability questions, even in my personal life.
Mhm.
So good questions. Thank
These
you,
are
Julie.
great.
These
And
are
I'm
great.
so glad that other Julie remembered our platinum rule: treat others the way they want to be treated. I love
Right.
that one. These are
Yeah, and Rebecca, y'all have some great comments. Extend the grace you'd want someone to extend to you, right? Because we oh, and this is, I'm really going to be struggling to remember the exact quote, but from that EI training we did over quarantine was, you know, we view other people's actions coming from like that worst case scenario, but we view ourselves and our actions from basically our intentions. So it's always good to remember that. Yeah, man, I like this chat feature on here. It's really
The
really
chat
awesome.
is, so if y'all haven't had a chance, be sure you go back and read through the chat, because honestly, that is like a whole separate discussion going on at the same time. So we're gonna have to figure out, I might have to find a way to get some of that and be able to put some of that into our handout for the,
Yeah,
We're
and to be-
excited about the feature, and I hope that everyone's just as excited as we are about seeing, you know, all the questions and comments that other people are sharing with us today. Something
Right.
that Julie said whenever she was talking about those accountability questions is, you know, once you do that self-reflection, it's important for you to, I think you said in regards to watching tone,
Mhm.
how tone is so important, and it's something that we don't think about, but you know, tone is the music underneath your words, and it could escalate a situation or de-escalate. And it's not just about tone, it's some of the word choice, your word choice, some of the words that you use. I mean, it's important that, you know, and I'm thinking that these accountability questions are going to help with that pointing the finger, like I'm gonna do it the way Monica did, pointing that finger. And it's important that you avoid the blame game by using these blame statements. I mean, just listen to some of the words or the questions that I use. Who made this mistake? I mean, just listening to that tone, it's putting the blame on that individual.
it's totally focusing on the blame. It's not even thinking about a solution. It's just totally stopping at who did this. And that's why we talk about the accountability statement, which it says, did something in our process cause this problem? So in other words, giving him the benefit of the doubt from the very beginning. So, you know, what happened that, you know, what is it that we see here that might have made this happen, instead of you did this? Mm-hmm.
Our next one is, what did you do?
and that, yes, the
I've had
tone.
practice with that one. I heard that one a lot growing up. So
There's so many bad ways. Yes, almost as bad as, why did you do this? Why? Because,
yes.
you know, or what were you thinking? Because we know that means they weren't thinking, is what we think in that case. So instead of those kind of blame statements where you're actually just putting a barrier up, because as soon as I hear, what did you do? I'm like in defensive mode, and you're not going to get anything else out of me. So instead, when you hear that, changing it over to, okay, so what happened here? Okay, now I'm not looking at you. I'm not focusing on you as the problem. I'm focusing on the situation, saying, what happened and what can we do better? We're automatically changing it and looking at the situation and the possible solutions to it. So it's just a great way to start moving forward on that one.
The next one is, I'm not to blame. And I think by saying that, why you smile, Julie? I don't think you heard me say that before. I'm not to blame, but by saying that, you're basically, you know, trying to figure out who's to blame instead of analyzing the situation and getting to that root cause.
Yep. And, you know, instead of I'm not to blame, here's what happened, and factually going through it almost like a math problem where you're going, okay, here's the steps of exactly what happened. So we can find where the challenge was. And that's what helps us start working towards that solution instead of being stuck on the blame game.
Our next one is, it wasn't my mistake.
Yeah. And so by saying that, what are we saying? We're saying, it was that person's mistake. You know, as long as we can get that my off of it, it's somebody else's mistake. So instead, we change it to, okay, what can we learn from what's happened here? What can we learn from this? In other words, immediately stop talking about whose mistake it was. Stop talking about the blame. Instead, immediately going to, hey, what's the lessons learned that we could do better next time? And if we're concentrating on that, we don't have time to be defensive. We've
Mhm.
gotten into the positive side of conflict, which is making the change and being more positive and making sure that this doesn't happen again so that nobody has to say it wasn't my fault.
Mhm.
Right. The accountability statements does a great job of making sure you address the situation rather than directing it at the individual, I find. And when you combine that with choosing your words and monitoring your tone, that's going to set you up for success every time.
I agree. I agree because it's
Because Kim
totally,
is killing it with that. You hear the tone shift when she's
yes.
doing her negative version of it. What did you do? I mean,
Yeah, you can almost feel the body
I
language that
didn't
goes
do
with that.
anything. I don't know what you're talking about. So, okay.
And all
Yes.
it does is shut down that other person. When you start pointing the fingers, it's either going to shut them down or it's going to escalate the situation.
Right, because now I'm
And-
just gonna get louder. No, what did you do?
And that just scared me, just that tone she used.
There is the
I'd use
power
that one.
struggle. It begins.
So that's so true because, you know, if we can stop that, then we're not fighting with another person. We're fighting a problem together. So we're
Working
fighting a
together for a
situation.
solution.
We're
Yep.
both on the same side in that point. Linda, I had never heard this one. I've heard it called conducting an autopsy of the problem without seeking to assign blame. That's an interesting way to look at it. Yes.
I like it.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
As soon as you said autopsy, Law and Order played.
I lost you. Okay. Yeah. You just heard the dung. Yep.
Dun, dun.
Well, I think something that we haven't thought about, y'all, that these blame statements, if you go back to those first set of questions that Monica went through, that said, what difference will it make? Thinking about who made this mistake. Does that question make a difference in the outcome of the conflict? What did you do? None of these make a difference in the outcome. So I think shifting from that mentality of somebody has to be at fault to just, okay, it happened. Let's figure out how we can avoid that in the future.
Where do we go from here?
Mm-hmm. It's all about the future. We can't do anything about the past. We can do something about the future.
Mhm.
Yep.
And a lot of these, you know, questions and all of this information that we're talking about, you could use whether it's an in-person conflict or a virtual conflict, because sometimes it can happen, even using some of the platforms that we have. Because if you're trying to resolve conflict, sometimes it's not trying to resolve it via a text message or an email is not the best method for you to use. I like to handle conflict. When I handle conflict, I want you to see my face and hear the sincerity in my voice and my body language for you to be able to know that I'm genuinely sorry, or I really want to work through things.
I think one of the hardest things with the virtual business place that we're in now is making that decision. Nobody wants to click and say, okay, let's Zoom on this. You know, let's Zoom on what on this discussion that we're having that we're not getting along. That is a hard button to push.
Mhm.
Yes, but we've found in our situations, it de-escalates it so quickly if you just get back face to face. I mean, the phone's great, but this is face to face and you can talk to somebody and you remember how much this person really cares, how much this person, you respect them. It changes the way you feel about the whole discussion. So where it might be a hit and run with a text or an email, and even the phone calls are great, man, if you can get the guts up to push the button and have a Zoom conference with somebody that you're having a conflict with, you have moved to a new level of conflict resolution. And I think that is a very strong one that we can all dream of getting to.
Mm-hmm.
We're never going to like it, but we're going to be better people because of it, because this is our new workplace.
That's right.
And we've definitely seen how by just looking at something that's written, whether it is, like you said, an email or a text message, how easily that can be misconstrued and just create a problem that does not even exist. And so if you go ahead and address that issue, that's gonna make it that much more simpler. Because so much is open to interpretation. It's like how you read the person's message. Have you ever done that? Depending on who's writing you, you hear that voice in your head. And like you've created this whole scenario that's not even the case. So like Chrissy's saying, when you're having that verbal and, actual visual, you can see more, get more perspective, ask questions. You can't ask a text message a question. We actually have a 3-message rule. After 3 message, if it isn't cleared up, it needs to be a phone call at least happening, just so the water doesn't get any more muddy.
No, I love that rule.
That's a
a
good
great rule. Has any one of you tried to resolve conflict in a text message or an email before?
Tried.
I tried,
Yeah.
not successful. And I think it speaks to what Monica was saying, that, you can add tone in an email where it wasn't, the sender did not mean for the tone to be, especially if your emotions are rising.
Oh,
You
yes.
could, I could read, well, that's okay. And I'm in my mind, I'm like, well, that's okay. That's what she meant. It's okay. Well, it's okay with me too. So it's really, important that you try to use that platform with Zoom, or, if you can't do a Zoom call, at least maybe a phone call would help. But text message and email, I have not had success with that. So I'm writing it down, Monica. I'm going to use that 3 rule.
Yep.
Well, I mean, yeah, Kalisha, thank you for bringing up that point. I think a lot of personality styles, and this is going to make us all crack up, but we had one of our facilitators who doesn't work with us any longer, but Takira, and she had such a direct personality that we finally started having to tell her, when she was telling a joke at the end of it, she had to say, ha ha, so people knew she was joking and would laugh. I think your delivery, but seeing that in text definitely leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation. And oftentimes what you'll see and what we teach in our professional writing class, we interpret written messages based on what's going on in our life. So based on our day, like our emotions, and right now it's just a stressful time for everybody. You haven't seen people in 6 months or however long we are at this point. Actually, I think 6 months to the day that we've been home. So I think we just have to be mindful, and it goes back to, and I can't remember who said it in the chat, but giving grace. We don't always know what's going on in other people's, and not assuming the worst in people.
Mm-hmm. I love
And I
that.
want to ask, you guys out there, do you have any tips on dealing with conflict while working remotely? Do you have any tips or tricks that you used?
Just looking at some of the comments right now, I got to say, Ronald, I love his quote: "The aim of argument and of discussion should not be victory, but progress."
Ooh,
That's awesome.
Man,
that's awesome.
Drop the mic. That's excellent.
Spirit fingers.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
And Brene Brown says, "Be generous with self and others. Assume best intentions." Mm-hmm.
I love Brene
And
Brown.
I'll plug Brene Brown because I was listening to her podcast, which is phenomenal if you haven't listened to it. But she has a 2-part episode that's on the art of an apology. We're not going to talk about that in today's episode or in today's webinar, but something that you might want to check out if apologies aren't your strong suit. And she goes into the science behind why, and I found it really, really fascinating.
She's wonderful.
I'm writing that down as well. Art of the apology.
And we got to keep that one in mind. And and like what Macy's saying, I like that it's your problem until you make it someone else's. You need to make them understand that you drew conclusions. So in other words, if I got that okay, like Kimberly was saying, you said okay, well, what does that mean? That's what was going through my head. So trying to explain that to someone, that I heard you say that, and I thought that meant that you were angry, or that I thought this, so explaining to them so they have a chance to give you the other side. Well, then you're able to see it wasn't really a conflict at all.
Right.
And I think that's kind of an important one to keep in mind. So that was a really good one she mentioned.
Yeah, and Macy,
Yes,
that
Michael,
just
love that.
triggered that triggered a thought that left my mind earlier. Something else that I got from Brene Brown was the story that I'm telling myself. Starting conversations with that. The story that I'm telling myself is this. You know, because we make a lot of assumptions sometimes, especially through that text communication, that this is the story I'm telling myself. So if you take it from that standpoint, it's way less accusatory than you did this.
Mm-hmm. You know, yeah, this is how I'm hearing. Here's what I'm thinking, you know. So letting them have the opportunity to tell us, no, you're not really, you're not hearing what I'm saying. That's not how I meant it. Because we all have those. We've all had those emails that we got on a 4:30 on a Friday, and we fumed, lost the whole weekend, angry about it, got back in Monday, reread the email and went, oh, wait, no, that's not what they meant. We waste a lot of time on those kinds of things. So anytime we could clear that up immediately, we're in a better place.
Any more comments or
Oh,
suggestions
there's some
out
great
there?
ones.
Ugh.
Somebody quoting, Amanda, you're quoting one of our earlier webinars. Can I say we love you? She said if there's an issue or question, text or email the person to ask them when a good time is to talk.
Yes.
Instead of automatically assuming that now is the time. It's it's good for me, so it must be good for them. Instead, scheduling a time to talk to them, so that you have that time to think through it, and they're making sure that it's a good time for them.
And also just with responding to those texts or emails, remembering not to do that immediate.
Yeah, I love that.
What,
When you were a
disappear?
picture. I like that. That's the kind of thing that
That's
happens.
how mad I was. You
There
I
you
mean,
go.
you send that message back with such fierce it shuts everything down. Like step
Please.
back, take a second, breathe, think it through. Ask yourself those questions. What's really happening in this situation? Is it really worth it? What am I really trying to convey?
Yeah.
Before you
Like
fire
Terry
up those
says.
fingertips.
Before you, like Terry says, you shoot from the hip and then
Yeah.
find out, oh, never mind.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
And
what I
then-
love about those questions, though, is that it helps you remove the emotions. Because when you have emotions, there's no way that you could think with a clear head. So removing those emotions will give you a little bit of clarity, have you step back and reassess it and realize maybe you're being chicken little, just like me.
And Danielle brings up a very excellent point. Sometimes conflicts can't be resolved immediately. Depending on everybody's how they want to deal with conflict. Like some people need time. Hello, me. Like I'm not going to be the person who wants to talk about it immediately. Like I need to cool my jets for a little bit and then let's circle back to it.
That's great. The chat comments, there's just too many to even bring up how many good ones we have there. I do recommend that you save the chat because I think that you're going to see a lot of other tips in there that are going to be useful to you. That's good stuff. So lots of stuff about a virtual conflict.
So do we have any closing thoughts, you guys? Anyone wants to share about conflict and accountability or anything that you've heard throughout the webinar today?
Let's see here. Gosh, there's been so much good stuff. I love the fact that like everybody in the chat has had ideas about ways that we can make it more about creating and continuing relationships. Like somebody was talking about making sure they know that you're open to continuing the discussion, that this does not mean, okay, we've had the fight, the wall is up and that's it. We're not going to talk about this anymore. Instead, being willing to use conflict as that learning experience that we want it to be, to keep growing from it, to be able to say, okay, we see what went wrong there. What can we do to keep that from happening again?
Yeah, and Hope had put a great comment in the chat is, if something bothers you and you're going to approach the other person, 9 times out of 10, they have no clue it even bothered you.
Have you ever had a fight with somebody for a long time that they know nothing about?
Yes.
You're in battle. I'm having a feud with that person. They don't know it because you
Yes.
never had the talk. Yes. Julie agrees. Other Julie, I mean, yes. Good one.
Mhm. I think one thing though that we need to remember is that, you know, it's important for us to use these questions, and the more we use these questions, the better at it that we'll be. Now, I'm not saying go and look for conflict so that you can practice, because that's not the message that I'm trying to throw out there. I'm just saying that, you know, if something does occur, that, you know, you have those go-to questions where you can, you know, put it up on in your cube or have it handy, you know, for you to be able to to look at in case something happens.
I think Stacy sums it up really well too. She said her, as a supervisor, her biggest takeaway from today when addressing conflict will be to ask, is there a deeper issue than the conflict at hand? In other words, being willing to do the homework and find out if there's something more involved makes us more effective, so that this conflict doesn't have to be something that just keeps coming back at us.
Yeah, because I mean, none of us really enjoy dealing with conflict or working through it. So getting to that root cause, so you only have to address it once instead of just putting band-aids on the symptoms and you're circling back to it frequently. And like Kalisha said, and you have to ask yourself, is this going to matter tomorrow, next month, next year?
That's a good question, because I was just about to ask, especially for people like myself who, you know, try to avoid conflict and then wait until it's a big pile. And you have to ask that question, is this, you know, is this the deeper issue? And my question was, so when you realize that, okay, it had nothing to do with, you know, whatever, a pin or whatever, whatever small that happened, how do you address it? Do I come to you and Julie and say on May 9th, 1999, when you did this, how do you address it?
I think, you know, it depends on who you're dealing with. Some people are going to want to know those examples. I think especially for my mind to wrap my hand around it, like if you can't give me a specific time or example, and we do those general sweeps of you're always this or you never do this, the whole time I'm going to be thinking about, here's the one time I didn't do it. So that's what I'm going to be coming back with. So I think it depends on who the conflict is with.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think that, you know, we had a lot of good tips and tricks today. I know that I took a lot of notes. That 3 rule, art of the apology. I have a lot of homework after this.
And the good thing is we got 2 more times to be able to address this when we go into our next 2 episodes about conflict. This was just the scratching of the surface. This was the beginning. Now, remember, we got the handouts. I'm probably going to end up taking some of this from the chat because y'all had too many good comments. Probably end up taking some of that and incorporating it. So you're not going to have the handouts today. I'll be honest with you. I was going to just go ahead and have them up there, but no, y'all were too good. We got to add some of that. So those will be up there in the next day or 2, and they will be available on the Success Series page of the TD page, where it has talent development. Okay, you go to that page, you go to the page that has Success Series webinar, that little circle goes around it, and then you click on that and you'll be able to pull up all of the handouts from all of the webinars that we've done in the past. If you click right now, Kim, I think it'll bring those up. It'll even bring up the list of some of the ones that we have in the past. So there's a lot of topics in there you might be interested in looking back at. Even if you didn't see the webinar, the handouts are useful for you on those. The next thing that we also have at this time, for you to be able to see this, we're going to be putting this onto YouTube like we have the other ones. We're at like over 1,300 views on YouTube. So we're just like in heaven right now. We will add this to that list, and you have all the Success Series webinars in there. You can go back and watch whichever ones that you want to talk, want to learn more on. You want a chance to find out more. You might even find some past ones that you have questions that we could do a future webinar on. So please keep that in mind as you go through those. The other place that you can find the same content again is going to be on Leo. And I just love the fact that we have this available because they put it in Leo. It doesn't mean you get credit for it. It means it's there as a convenience to you. But the thing is, in the Leo ones, it breaks it down. If you click on that again, Kim, I think it'll show Yeah, it breaks it down to the sections of the webinar. So you can go to a specific topic you're interested in and click on that and go straight to it. So that's kind of cool too. So we have a lot of different ways for you to keep getting information from these webinars. And you'll be able to join us next month when we continue talking about conflict with the ABCs. I think we're going to be dealing with the basics of how to deal with conflict.
And I'm so excited that you guys took the time out to spend with us this afternoon. And thank you to our wonderful panelists for sharing your tips and tricks. I hope that you guys enjoyed the new chat feature and this new platform that we're having these webinars on.
Yeah, and kudos, give a shout out to our audience. Thank you guys for being so interactive, even though we may have been distracted by your comments. Thank you guys for your
We love them.
participation. Yes, it's been great.
There's not a certificate for this, that you know that you've attended this. So if you need to prove to somebody that you attended it, that maybe there's some other way you could figure that out. Maybe you could tell them some of the information you learned on it. That would be a great way to prove you attended. Share at least 3 facts from this webinar with somebody. Okay? Excellent stuff.
All
Thank
right.
you, Joanne.
All right.
That's awesome. It's worth it without the certificate. There you go.
Absolutely. Kim?
All right. So, well, thank you everyone for joining us. And remember,
Keep on learning.
Bye.
Every day for every citizen.